Good evening, YouTube. This is Our Future, and the power's with the people. Over the last week or so, I've noticed that there's reading on a lot of black posts and black comments on black videos concerning Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, that there seems to be a pulling away from Martin Luther King's philosophy and a growing consensus towards Malcolm X's more militant philosophy. I'd like to take that a step further and show that this is a pulling away from Christianity towards Islam as well. And we need to be very mindful of this. And I also want to show in this video a connection between the Freemasons and the Ku Klux Klan, and then the black Freemasons and the civil rights movement, the abolitionist movement, and everything else. So you have two groups of the exact same group, the Scottish Rite Freemasonry, all originating out of Boston, Massachusetts, and Yale and Harvard, and all these other groups. That all of these people are a tight-knit group originating from the same thing, pitting two different ideas on two different groups of people. Okay, so this is a really dangerous road, and you can clearly see how the Freemasons were involved in the hatred between and the absolutely misleading of whites and Christians and blacks and Christians towards black Muslims and civil rights and all the oppression and everything that we see now. My calling is for Christians, black and white, to unify now. We cannot fall into this temptational trap of pride and ignorance and hatred and militant groups. We have to be peaceful. So please listen to what I have to say here, take notes, and comment, and subscribe to my channel. If you have any other questions on Freemasonry, you're welcome to go and look at my book, Chapter 5, on the Illuminati and Freemasons. Specifically looking at the fez hat that the Shriners wear. I make a point of that in my chapter of my book, The Case to Prepare. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started looking at Albert Pike and his Satanism. Okay, we're going to jump right into this, but if you're new to my channel or have any other questions on Freemasonry, I invite you to check out Chapter 5 of my book, The Case to Prepare, and that is on the Illuminati and Freemasons. So this here's an article describing Albert Pike's letter to Mazzini, and we're gonna go into this right now. Let's go ahead and read what he talks about here. The First World War must be brought about in order to permit the Illuminati to overthrow the power of the czars in Russia and making that country a fortress of atheistic communism. The divergences caused by the agents of the Illuminati between the British and Germanic empires will be used to foment this war. At the end of the war, communism will be built and used in order to destroy the other governments and in order to weaken the religions. The Second World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences between the fascist and the political Zionist. This war must be brought about so that Nazism is destroyed and that the political Zionism be strong enough to institute a sovereign state of Israel in Palestine. During the Second World War, international communism must be strong enough in order to balance Christendom, which would then be restrained and held in check until the time when we would need it for the final social cataclysm. The Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the agentur of the Illuminati between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam and political Zionism mutually destroy each other. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on the issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economical exhaustion. We shall unleash the nihilist and atheist, and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm, which in all its horror will clearly show the nations the effect of absolute atheism, origin of savagery, and of the most bloody turmoil. Then everywhere, the citizens, obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries, will exterminate those destroyers of civilization and the multitude disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will from that moment be without compass or direction, anxious for an ideal, but without knowing where to render its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, brought finally out into public view. This manifestation will result from the general reactionary movement, which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time. So this was Albert Pike's letter that he wrote in 1871. And as we can see, the First World War was the Jews that created the Bolshevik Revolution and created the USSR, killing the Tsar and all of his family members and sons and daughters. The Second World War was basically exactly like that. And in the Third World War, like I said, is increasingly becoming a spiritual war between Christians and Muslims. So if we look at who Albert Pike is, excuse me here, this man right here was a 33-degree Freemason and a Confederate general. As you can see here, we can go into this. He wrote the Morals and Dogma of Freemasonry. He was a Satanist. And this man is the only man Confederate soldier to have a statue in Washington, D.C. to this day. The Freemasons actually worship this guy. Okay, so this is a really scary dude right here. So then we go to his friend, who would be Nathan Bedford Forrest. Now, Nathan Bedford Forrest was also a Confederate general, and this is him right here. And this guy, he was the first Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan, or Grand Wizard, excuse me. Okay, so, and he was also a Freemason. And then if we go to A Tale of Two Statues by Joe Green, we can see that there's a statue of Nathan Bedford Forrest there. And then, of course, Albert Pike. And basically what he's saying is that Albert Pike was in the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, and he was also one of the top guys in the KKK at the same time. So this is a connection between the Freemasons and the Ku Klux Klan. Okay, so this is in the 1800s, post Civil War era. So one of the things about Nathan Bedford Forrest is this guy was a really ruthless individual. If you just go into the Wikipedia of what this guy did, he had no problem mercilessly slaughtering blacks and whites and Mexicans and whoever he chose. And which is why he was highly successful in what he did. But clearly you can see a connection here between the Freemasons and the Ku Klux Klan. All right, and this would be going all the way up into present day and through the civil rights movements. So then we're going to switch gears here, and we're going to look at Prince Hall. And Prince Hall, there's a picture of him there, and I'm sure many black people will know exactly who Prince Hall is. Prince Hall from 1735, 1738 to 1807, they're not sure what year the guy was born, was an abolitionist and leader in the free black community in Boston. He founded Prince Hall Masonry and lobbied for education rights and African American children, and he was also active in the Back to Africa movement. Hall tried to gain New York's enslaved and free blacks a place in Freemasonry, education, and the military, and was considered the founder of Black Freemasonry in the United States, known today as Prince Hall Freemasonry. Hall formed the African Grand Lodge of North America. Prince Hall was unanimously elected its Grand Master and served until his death in 1807. So let's look at early life here, and you'll just have to forgive my camera work, but this is the best I can do right now. So let's look at this because this is interesting. Prince Hall was born between 1735 and 1738. His place of birth and parents are also unclear. Prince Hall mentioned in his writings that New England was his homeland, so there is a possibility he was born in England. The Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, in its proceedings of 1906, opted for 1738, relying on a letter from Reverend Jeremy Belknap, a founder of Massachusetts Historical Society. Prince Hall's birthday is traditionally celebrated on September 14th. Hall's early years are unclear. Historian Charles H. Wesley theorized that by age 11, Prince Hall was enslaved or in service to, you got to pay attention, Boston tanner William Hall, and by 1770 was a free, literate man and has always been accounted as a free man. It was through William Hall that Prince learned how to process and dress leather. Inside Prince Hall, historian David L. Gray states that he was unable to find any official historical record of the manumission. Hall, identified as able to read and write, may have been self-taught, or like other enslaved people and freed blacks in New England, he may have had assistance. An 11-year-old, I would say he had assistance. And what's extremely interesting about this man is that he was raised from age 11. So you're not an abolitionist at age 11, okay? You're not anything at age 11. He was under the care of William Hall, and that would be M. William Hall. And this is the interesting part, okay, is that there is really no information on William Hall, but I'm going to get to the little bit of information that we have, and it's quite interesting. All right, so this is the charitableirishsociety.org, and it's talking about the halls of Boston. And then again, this would be Prince Hall. Okay, and so I'm sure, all the blacks would consider Prince Hall probably more important than Martin Luther King Jr. especially if they're Freemasons. So let me get this squared away here. I want to read this to you, and please keep in mind this is really important information. In May, the 5-year-long, let me start where we got to, let's see. In May, the 5-year-long effort of the Prince Hall Masonic Lodge of Dorchester concluded with an unveiling of a monument on Cambridge Common in honor of its founder, Prince Hall, 1735 to 1807. Later in the month, members of the Charitable Irish Society gathered at the Old Granary Burial Ground in Boston to lay a wreath at the grave of William Hall, 1696 to 1771. So, Prince Hall was the most famous black civil leader in the Boston area during the American Revolution and through the turn of the 19th century. He was recognized as the voice of the black community politically on such subjects as slavery, public education, and economic equality. Believed to be born somewhere in the Caribbean, Hall was bought from Massachusetts Bay Colony at a young age to begin a life as an indentured servant. As was customary at the time, he carried the surname of his master, William Hall. Now, here's what's so funny. Little is known about William except that he was a leather merchant of Irish heritage. In 1766, he became the first known president of the Charitable Irish Society. which was founded in Boston some 30 years earlier. In 1770, a year prior to his death, about a month after the Boston Massacre, he and his wife released Prince Hall from service. Okay, and then it goes on to talk about in 1775, Prince Hall became a Master Mason in the Irish Constitution Military Lodge number 441, an integrated lodge that attached to the British Army then stationed in Boston. You understand, this is before the American Revolution. After the British evacuated Boston the following year, Hall began, well, not before the Declaration of Independence. Hall began efforts to provide for a separate African American lodge. This resulted in the formation in 1791 of the African Grand Lodge of North America, of which Hall became Grand Master. Now, there is no information about William Hall. There's no information about William Hall being a Freemason. What's interesting about this charitable Irish Charitable Society is you're going to see that there's a huge connection between Boston and the Freemasons, and that this organization, this charitable Irish thing, they actually dressed with the same garments and had the same initiations and everything else that Freemasons did. So I think it's safe to say that if he got this kid at 11 years old, he taught him to read and write. He taught him about Freemasonry, and this very well could be an alias. This is something that we don't know anything about. And obviously, all of this information has been kept from us. So, you know, unless you're a Master Mason, you're not going to get this information. Unless some of you do. And if you do, please comment, because I can't find it. So I want to show you the Charitable Irish Society of Boston. And that this guy, that William Hall, founded this in 1737. But there is no talk about this man at all. But I want to show you who famous people have been members of this society, just to show you how big a deal it is. So Patrick A. Collins, James Michael Curley, Patrick Donahue, John F. Fitzgerald, Hugh O'Brien, John C. Park, James McGee, Daniel Malcolm, Peter Pelham, and Robert Amity. And you can also go in to see that they had ties with the Kennedys. They had ties with some very, very huge people. So in order for there not to be any information about William Hall, that means that it is totally hidden from us. So this is telling me, my theory is that there was a plan well back before the start of this country and the formation of its colonies, that Britain would come over here and colonize this place. The Jews would bring the slaves in, like I showed you in my other video, and then they would pit the Freemasons, and the Illuminati would pit the whites against the blacks through the Freemasons. Because I just showed you a connection with white Freemasons and the Ku Klux Klan and all the problems that have existed from that. And now I'm showing you the black Freemasons and how they're all involved in civil rights and abolitionists. And they come from this charitable Irish Society of Boston, who are some of the richest people in the world. Okay, so this is just too good to be true. If anybody has any other information on this, I would really love to hear from you, and I'm sure a lot of other people would too. So let's just go through here. This is Lodge and other Masonic Black History Month celebrating famous Black Freemasons. Now, this is pretty interesting, okay? So let's look at this. Start digging into the history of Freemasonry, and you will discover that Duke Ellington was just one of the many renowned African-American musicians to be inducted into its mysterious world. He was joined by the likes of Nat King Cole, W.C. Handy, Dizzy Gillespie, Count Basie, Lionel Hampton, and Paul Robeson. By 1900, Prince Hall Masonry had become a forum of politicized African Americans, with Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois serving as active members. Throughout the 20th century, many key figures in the civil rights movement were attracted to Freemasonry. The father of Martin Luther King Jr., Martin Luther King Sr., 1900 to 1984, was a member of the 23rd Lodge in Atlanta. Medgar Evers, the NAACP activist who was assassinated in 1963, was a 32nd degree Freemason in the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, Southern jurisdiction. Now, this is the same one that Albert Pike is a member of, or was a member of. This is the same accepted rite of Freemasonry that the KKK stems from. You can't make this up. Alex Haley, 1921 to 1992, was the writer of Roots, and the biographer of Malcolm X was a 33-degree Mason in the same order. Thurgood Marshall, 1908 to 1993, the first black member to the U.S. Supreme Court, was supported by his Prince Hall Lodge in Louisiana. Richard Pryor, Ozzie Davis, Paul Robeson, Sugar Ray Leonard, Shaquille O'Neal, and Nelson Mandela, just to name a few. Are y'all seeing any connection here at all to the problems that we're having? Any? You know, now let's go to Malcolm X. Okay? And this is the one that scares me the most, because as a Christian, I'm starting to see blacks fall away from the teachings of Martin Luther King and go to this guy. And that also means that y'all are going to be more attracted to Islam instead of Christianity. And that's a very dangerous way of thinking. And if there's any blacks out there right now that are listening to this that are Christians, I really hope that if you hear people talk about Malcolm X and Islam, that you understand that as a Christian, the two cannot be the same. They can't. The philosophies are completely different. This man is militant. Martin Luther King was peaceful. All right. Now, this is an interesting story, the untold story of the inmate who helped shape Malcolm X's future. And this goes in to talk about John Elton Bembry. And this guy, this article was written by his nephew, believe it or not. But it goes in to talk about this guy that was basically a career criminal, but he was super intelligent, and he basically became Malcolm Little's mentor in prison. The interesting thing about the prison where they were, and let me get to that part, give me just a second, where they talk about, this is him, all right. So Elton was committed to the Massachusetts State Prison on May 12, 1943. His sentence was 5 to 7 years, and he worked as a license plate laborer. Elton stood out for his light-faced complexion and with freckles. He did his work with pride and always received high praise. These are comments from several prison reports. Reads biographies and good fiction. Devotes fair share of his spare time in studying English and other kindreds of subjects. Always use spare time constructively. A studious chap, well-meaning, polite, but a little too sure of himself in his aspirations. Very good worker, proficient, and intelligent. All right, so this intelligence earned Elton a transfer to the state prison colony Norfolk, a medium security prison for model prisoners that was launched in 1927 by Harvard professor Howard Belding Gill, whose intent with the facility was to rehabilitate motivated inmates in an environment that was more college campus than institution. Inmates were often taught by college professors representing some of the esteemed universities in the Boston area, including Harvard. Elton took classes while at Norfolk, earning a certificate after completing a correspondence course in elementary English and rhetoric, and followed that by taking vocabulary building part 1. He worked in the tailor shop there, pitched the unit's baseball team, and served on the inmate council and regularly attended religious service. He was a member, according to documents, of the prison's esteemed debate team, and during the period of 1933 and 1966, when the inmates had a record of 144-8 while competing against schools that included Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. Okay, now this prison, if you look it up, what this prison is, and this is it right here, the Massachusetts Correctional Institution of Norfolk, is a medium-based security prison with the average daily population of 1,500 inmates. Though it's rated as medium security, it also houses some maximum security. One of the notable inmates of MCI Norfolk was Malcolm X, who was also a member of the Norfolk Debating Society while incarcerated. Okay. Norfolk was founded in 1927 as Norfolk Prison Colony, a model prison community conceived by sociologist and penologist Howard Belding Gill from Harvard, 1913-1914, who was appointed its first superintendent in 1931. Gill was dismissed in 1934 after an escape by 4 inmates and replaced by his deputy, Morris N. Winslow, who served as superintendent from 1934 to 1950. The name of the prison was changed to the Massachusetts Correctional Institution of Norfolk in the mid-1950s. Famous civil rights activist Malcolm X was incarcerated at Norfolk, and he attended in prison school where he furthered his education far beyond the 8th grade. The prison school and library are where he picked up his love of reading and learned how to articulate and debate his points in an argument, as he was part of the Norfolk Debating Society. He has even stated that he began his education here by copying down an entire dictionary word for word, learning the words. During the 1950s, the Norfolk Debating Society, a team consisting of prison inmates, beat a number of university teams, including Oxford Union and Oxford University. Now, one thing I want to add to this is that the guy that started this prison system, his name was Howard Belding Gill, a graduate of Harvard. His wife, who was also a big-time psychiatrist, and she did a lot of experimental studies there. Interesting thing about this woman, and her name is Isabel V. Kindig, that you really can't find any real information of any kind of studies that this woman did, but she was literally the head of all kinds of stuff. As like, she was the head of everything. Oddly enough, I can't find any studies or any actual work that she did without having to go through a 400-page book. So no abstracts, no essays, no really nothing to do this. But if anybody understands in the truther movement, you know, and any of y'all understand MK Ultra and all of these kind of things, then I don't think it's too far to theorize that there's a extreme possibility that this prison system was used to try to tailor people such as Malcolm Little to become somebody like Malcolm X. There's a good chance that they used MK Ultra on Malcolm Little to make him do and say the things that he did. Oddly enough, Albert Pike has ties to Harvard. All of these people have ties to Harvard. Harvard, you know, and of course Yale being the Skull and Bones 322. All of this stuff seems to tie together and have very similar acquaintances. And one last thing I want to point to, that a lot of these people from this prison system, including Malcolm X and including this Bembry guy, they all reference this guy right here, Henry David Thoreau. And this Henry David Thoreau, you know, I don't really know this guy. That's him right there. You know, some of you educated people might know him a little bit more than I do. But he was an essayist, poet, and philosopher, transcendentalist, and best known for his book Walden, Simple Living, Civil Obedience, or Civil Disobedience. So this guy was kind of an illusionary, you know, and I think he has ties to Freemasonry and all of that stuff as well. Uh, Civil disobedience in the Walden years, 1845 to 1850. These are things that are a extreme, huge part of our American history that we have never been taught. We've never been taught any of this stuff. And then, of course, I want to go back into this article right here one more time about this is U.S. Studies Online, the religious life of Malcolm X. If any of you don't know, I would highly suggest that you read these articles about the complexity of Malcolm Little. This guy he was out there, and I really believe that they must have done some kind of psychiatry experiments and programming on this man to make him do exactly what he did. The interesting part right here. Religion was the next mentioned in Malcolm's autobiography when he is referred to as Satan while serving a lengthy jail sentence for burglary. Up to this point, it is thought Malcolm was an atheist, but anger at his jail sentence caused his frustrations to be directed at God. As Manning Marble states, he had never been particularly religious, but now concentrated his profanities against God and religion in general. It was also during this time that a previously atheist, Malcolm Little, found a religion that he identified through with Islam. All right. Now, is that not just a little bit scary? And let me pause just for 1 minute here. And, well, we're almost out of time. Okay, so really quick, I just, I basically just did a search for celebrity Shriners. Of course, you got Harry Truman. There's some interesting faces through here. 1 second. There's Colonel Sanders, from Kentucky Fried Chicken. That is Buzz Aldrin. John Wayne. If we can go here, Leonardo DiCaprio, if we can look, Shaquille O'Neal, Prince Edward, James C. Penney, Arnold Palmer, John Elway, Booker T. Washington. I mean, look at this one, Bill Cosby. Isn't that interesting? Scottie Pippen. The list it goes on forever. Mark Twain. Look at these guys. This is unbelievable in the shape of our country and our societies. Here is, do you know who that is? That's Brad Paisley. Proud to be a Freemason. Here's McElroy, Brad Pitt, and then of course there's Shaq, and what's that guy's name? Jack Sparrow, Abe Lincoln. This is absolutely unbelievable. If you go through here, how many people are on this list? It literally just goes on for absolute ever. And so I think you guys can see this. I'm really curious to what you guys think. Like I said, I apologize for the crappy camera work, but I was just trying to get this out here, and hopefully we'll see what kind of response we get. And we've got to follow Christ, and we've got to follow Christ now bigger than ever. I got a bad feeling that Albert Pike's dream in his letter will come true, and I see a pulling away of black Christians to Islam now. Through Malcolm X. I think this is all part of the design. And as you can see, I think it's clear that the blacks and whites were used from hundreds and hundreds of years ago, well before slavery, well before the colonies were even here. To go ahead and do this and use the North American continent as a way to promote racism, and all while the other group that was in control of the whole thing, as if you saw in my other video, they were the ones that are now pointing the finger on white supremacy. But as you can see, the white supremacy was part of the Scottish Rite Freemasons. And then the Black Civil Rights Movement was part of the Scottish Rite Freemasons. So to me, this is a huge, huge problem. And anyway, we need y'all to pray, and we need y'all to speak up if you hear this kind of talk. All right? Y'all take care. God bless.